What's going on, my good people? Mike Hidalgo here. Thank you for joining me on another FCP Euro DIY. Today we are working on a 2018 Volvo XC90. Today on this XC90, we are going to be covering how to replace your front control arms. This should be pretty much straightforward for most spa chassis Volvos. In front of us, we have one of the kits available on FCP Euro, which are ready to rock and roll. This includes the arms and all their hardware needed to do the DIY. One thing to know about these arms is these are a redesign from Volvo. These new arms have hydro-filled bushings or hydraulic bushings versus a standard hollow rubber bushings. So these help reduce NVH complaints, which is something people have expressed in this platform XC90. So that's going to give you a nice, quiet, more smoother ride. The only downside really to these bushings is they may not last as long as the standard rubber bushings. When they go, they do start to leak, which is a nice telltale sign that your bushings are bad. So depends how you want to look at it. For me, I think it's a nice sign if you're like, oh, these are leaking, time to replace them. These should last anywhere from 60 to 100,000 miles. It really depends on the kind of driving your car does. The one behind us has 102,000 miles on it. It's still in pretty okay shape, but I'll be curious to see what those bushings look like on those arms when we pull them out. And again, as mentioned before, the kit includes all the hardware, the seal for the axle, new axle bolts, as we will be loosening those up to get that done. And this is part of a larger series, which we're doing. We have a front strut DIY, we have a rear shock DIY, we have the control arms today. We'll be doing tie rods on another day. So if you want to see more videos like this, consider subscribing to the channel. All right, before we get too crazy though, let's take a look at some of the tools we're going to need to do this DIY. All right, for this DIY, we have a large 25-inch pry bar. We have a big 1/2-inch torque wrench, a big 1/2-inch ratchet, 3/8 drive torque wrench, 3/8 drive ratchet. We have an 18mm wrench, which is going to help us with one of the nuts on the control arms, a small pick tool and a small flathead screwdriver. As far as sockets go, we have a 19, we have an 18, a 15, a 13, a 10, and an 8. Specialty sockets, if you will, a T25 for the fender liner hardware. I have a bunch of adapters and extensions to switch between the tools that we're working with here to accommodate the 1/2-inch and 3/8 drive sockets, as well as the 1/4 inch. I have a large BFH and a rubber mallet, as well as a brass pin. I have some copper grease, I have a paint pen and a tape measure, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And then we have some electric tools here, an electric 1/2-inch impact, an electric 3/8 drive. Not pictured, but needed is going to be a screw jack or floor jack, depending on where you're working, as we're going to have to tighten down some of the hardware at ride height. But with that, let's go ahead and get started on this DIY. All right, before we get up in the air and take the car apart, we want to pay attention to ride height. Ride height is going to mean where the car sits when the car is on the ground, riding on the ground. When we go to tighten everything up later, the knuckle mainly, we want to make sure that we're using our screw jack and our floor jack to raise the suspension and tighten all the bolts at its normal position, which means what it's going to sit at when it's riding. If you tighten everything down at full droop, once the car goes on the ground, you're going to risk tearing or prematurely wearing all the bushings, as well as creating almost like a spongy-like ride for your car. So you definitely want to avoid that. So the easiest thing you can do is take a tape measure or ruler, whatever you have, from the center of your wheel, the center of the cap if you like, the center of the hub if you have the wheel off already, to the bottom of the fender. Measure that distance, and then later on when you're tightening everything down, make sure you reach that same distance between the hub and the fender, and then snug everything down at that height. For us, it's just 20 1/4 inches, so nothing too crazy. We can easily recreate that on the ground. All right, now with that, let's get the car up in the air. Let's get some wheels off and go from there. All right, now we have 5 19mm lug bolts to remove. I already have the lock one out because it's a little bit tedious, but now we're gonna zap out the other 4. All right, now we have the wheel off. We have a better view of what we are going to be doing. Because it's right in front of us and it's one of the things we have to remove, let's get this 13mm axle bolt out of our way. I'm just gonna zap this one out, but you can take it nice and easy. If you're gonna use a ratchet, just be sure to lock the rotor in place. I like to use a flathead screwdriver up against the brake caliper, and then you can break your bolt free just to keep the whole hub from spinning. These are low torque values, so they shouldn't be that tight in there. All right, now we have the axle bolt out. The next thing we're gonna work on while we're up here, we have an end link to undo, a pinch bolt for the upper strut before we move on to the bottom, and a couple, we have an 8mm on the side. So if you watched our strut replacement DIY, this is gonna be pretty much the first step of that. So let's get a little bit more closer in here. We'll loosen some things up in there. We'll get this fender liner out. We got a little bit to do up here. All right, we got an 18mm for the end link. There is a T40 pass-through. You may need to use a pass-through socket or a wrench to get that off. We got pretty lucky the last 2 times with this one where we can just break the nut free and then everything else came undone. But if it's the first time that yours comes out, you may have to do, again, T40 in the center with an 18mm pass-through socket to get that off. We're gonna undo this 8mm here off of the strut fork. Next, we're gonna break our 13mm pinch bolt free. All right, at this point, the next thing we're gonna do is remove our fender liner and this interior bit of fender liner. It's just 2 pieces. We have 1 main piece that's held in by a bunch of T25s and a couple expanding rivets and 2 plastic 10mm nuts. And then we'll pull that off. We'll pull off the interior piece, and that's gonna give us more room for the control arm hardware on the front and back side, because right now the fender liner covers a lot of that. So with that, let's get the T25 ready. We'll zap out those bolts and then go from there. We have an expanding rivet right here that we're gonna take care of. To get these undone, you simply push the center of them in. You don't go crazy, just push them in like that, you'll hear them click, and then you can pry out the rivet. Just using a little flathead to get it out. We have another one of those, usually 2 up top. This one has both, shockingly. So those 2 are gonna be in here. And we have 2 10mm plastic nuts. And now we're just gonna work the fender liner out all the way around. This is a great time to check your fender liners. On the driver's side, the windshield washer fluid reservoir lives right here. So it likes to collect a lot of dirt and debris. This side is not so bad. It's a little bit more open, but it's a great opportunity to get all this dirt and crap and leaves out of there so that it doesn't start to oxidize or corrode your fenders, Volkswagen style. I'm gonna clean that up really quick and then we're gonna move on from there. All right, before we get underneath, I wanna make sure that this axle is gonna be able to be driven out. Sometimes these come out really easily. If they've never been out before, they can be a little bit stuck. So a brass punch on the flat surface of the axle with your hammer. I think it'll start to budge. A little penetrating fluid if you need to will help as well. But at least we're gonna shock it free doing that. All right, now we're gonna get underneath. We have an 18mm bolt to free up the strut fork. And then we have some ball joint hardware, which is gonna allow us to separate this whole hub assembly and swing it out forward and out of our way. We're gonna use our screw jack to support all of this while we're doing that, because we're gonna need room to swing out the control arm because it's in a tight pocket essentially. So let's do that now. Before we head underneath, we do have one more nut that we're gonna address now, and that's gonna be this 18mm locking nut here. This is part of, this is probably the more tedious part of this DIY, and that is because this nut is on a stud. The stud has to come out in order for the control arm. Think of it almost like a cassette into the subframe. It has to slide out. So without that stud removed, you can't get it out because it was too much for Volvo to just put a regular bolt and nut in this like the rest of the hardware. I'm not the engineer. Nonetheless, we're gonna take care of the 18mm nut now, and then we'll come back to it later when it's time to remove it so that we can get the whole control arm out. I'm gonna go in with my 1/2" ratchet and my 18mm socket, and I should have just enough room to get this thing out, or to break it free at least. All right, we'll come back to that later. Now we'll go underneath, take care of the rest of the hardware on the fork, the ball joint end, so that we can separate the whole hub assembly out of our way. One quick kind of pro tip when doing this job, if you're working on the right side, it helps to have your wheels facing towards the right, or turn your steering wheel to the right, you're on the driver's side, turn it to the left. It's just gonna give you a little bit more room to kind of swing everything out of the way. So I'm going to do that once we get the ball joint hardware separated and the thing freed up from the hub, or I'm sorry, the lower control arm. Then we'll turn everything to the right, and I'll show you what I mean by spacing it out of the way. So let's get underneath. We have two 15mm bolts to undo for the lower ball joint. We're gonna break these free with the ratchet first. All right, and now we're gonna separate the ball joint from the, or the whole lower control arm from the hub. We're gonna use a small pry bar in between the ball joint. You can see to either side of the ball joint, there's this little step, and that's a good spot to kind of pry off of. Break this baby free, and as we break this free, we're gonna try to push this whole assembly away, making sure that our axle is also coming out of the hub. If you haven't already, don't forget to pull off the smaller back cover after pulling off the fender liner. I don't know what I was thinking, my good people. I forgot to take this one out. We'll set it to the side. You can see here part of the control arm keys into the subframe on this side, same thing on the back side, which is why this cover needs to come out. All right, nonetheless, we have a pinch bolt for the bottom of the fork. Once we undo this, we can work the fork off of the strut, and that's gonna give us the room that we need. So let's get this bottom bolt off. 18mm bolt, we're gonna break this baby free using the 1/2" ratchet. Again, typically these aren't really that stuck in there, but it all depends on the kind of conditions that your car's been in. So don't be totally shocked if that's the case. All right, before we go any further, we're gonna grab our screw jack. That's what we're gonna use today to help keep this out of our way. You may be able to pop the grommet up in the wheel well out of your way. There's a big rubber plug, you can't miss it. It goes into the front of the strut tower in the engine bay. Maybe a small set of ratchet straps, and you can get this upper control arm kind of just up and out of your way like so. But for us, for here on the lift, and even if I was doing this at home, I think it's just easier to put a floor jack or screw jack underneath this. And what we're gonna do is lift and push this up out of our way like so. I'm gonna lift it from the back side, I think, so that this doesn't risk slipping off. That should be more than enough room there. Now we're gonna work this fork down and get it out of our way. You shouldn't really have to spread this on the back. I don't really think you're supposed to, but this one, these Bilsteins are a little bit of a tighter fit than the genuine wobble shock. Could be just how they paint them or how they make them. But once we get this going and smash all our fingers, you'll see the axle here has a plastic ring. Your kit should include a new one for that. I've misplaced mine, so we're gonna leave this be. They're just a dust seal, but we do have the one that's gonna go on the back of the hub, which we'll do later. I'm gonna go off of the coil spring with my bungee cord so that I'm not putting any extra weight on the upper control arm that's already holding up this whole hub assembly. You can also zip tie it or clothes hanger, whatever you have lying around that works. But that's the goal here for this. All right, before we deal with this stud, again, we're doing this without any special tools. There is a special tool for this. Think of it as a really fancy C-clamp that helps push this out. We're gonna avoid that today because it's an expensive tool and I don't think you need it. We're gonna come back to that in a second. We have 3 more 18s to remove down below, so let's zap those out next. All 3 of these bolts are the same size, so these are gonna be the 3 thicker 18s versus the 2 thinner 15s for the ball joint. We're gonna get rid of these, and then we're gonna work on getting this stud out. So you can see trying to kind of get in here with a big pry bar like this isn't really helpful. So what I have found that works is if we use the actual end of the control arm to act kind of as our press. So I'll show you what I mean. We're gonna get under here and just kind of pry the arm up a little bit, break the seal between the bracket bushing and the subframe. Now that it's sitting like that, I'm gonna use my hammer. I'm gonna hit this down again. And what I'm hoping here is that we have put enough of an angle on the bushing, bracket, and the stud that as we hammer this back down, it's gonna help get started, or at least help drive that stud out a little bit. New arm ready to rock and roll. Let's feed it back into its little cubby, its little home here. Front side in, then the back side. We're going to use our new stud to help just locate the arm in place on the back side. You can also use the bolts. It really doesn't matter which order you do this in, as long as you're able to get all four started by hand first. Let's get the 3/18s at the bottom fed in as well. The torque spec to this is going to be 110 Newton meters plus an additional 45 degrees or an eighth of a turn. We're going to use our 18 mil on our 1/2-inch drive torque wrench, and we should have just enough room to swing it between the control arm and the axle and get this baby snug down. This lower rearward 18 gets torqued to 105 Newton meters plus an additional 90 degrees. These two 18s get torqued down to 140 Newton meters plus 90 degrees. At this point, we're going to work on replacing our axle seal on the back side of the hub, our hub seal. Once we pop that baby in, we'll clean this up. Again, if you have the white seal, replace that as well. We'll drop the axle back down and then work on getting our strut fork back in place. For the hub side, we're just going to pop the seal off, flathead screwdriver. If you have it, a little bit of brake clean on a rag. Don't spray it directly onto the bearing and just clean up some of that grime. And then the new seal is just going to clip right in. It's got a couple little tangs all around it. Once you get it kind of lined up, you just push it in. Make sure it's even all the way around. And that's it. Let's get our axle down and get our strut fork back in place. Just make sure your clutch fork is facing the correct orientation before you go in with it. Curved back facing the engine. Even though we're going to tighten things at ride height, the goal is to get the bottom of the strut body seated into the bottom lip here on the strut fork. So make sure that is fully seated before you tighten anything down. Of course, again, putting it under load will help, but you want to make sure that's all the way up. All right, so make sure this is straight for when we get the control arm situated later. All right, now we are going to work on feeding our axle back into our hub. I'm going to clean these splines up a little bit, put a little bit of copper grease on there, and that should help them from sticking next time someone's in here doing some work. So we're going to spin the front a little bit until our splines engage. If they don't feel good, pull it out, spin it some more until you catch another set. As we do that, we want the bottom of the control arm to key into the bottom of our hub. Like so. Beautiful. That axle is coming through. I'm going to take our new bolt and just get it started so I don't lose the axle in the process of assembling everything. All right, that's good for now. We'll come back to that later, but at least now we're not going to lose the axle. All right, we're going to hop back underneath. We're going to get these two 15s started by hand, then we'll snug them up and torque them, and then move on to the strut fork. These two 15s get torqued down to 110 Newton meters. We're going to feed our bolt in from the back side and then get it started on the front side. And then we're going to draw it in nicely. We're not going to tighten it up. We're just going to snug it to a point where we don't have a big gap between the bushings and the fork. We'll do the same thing with the top pinch bolt on the strut fork, and then we'll set our ride height and then tighten them down. 13 mil going back in. Now I'm going to get my screw jack under here. We'll set up our ride height again, how we talked about the distance between the center of the hub and the bottom of our fender, and then we'll snug the bottom fork and the top fork bolt back up. We're going to set our ride height, and then we're going to get started with the lower 18 millimeter bolt. Just be mindful if you're jacking up from the control arm, a floor jack will do a great job at this. This screw jack spins around too much and it doesn't work for us. Make sure that you're not hitting the boot on your freshly installed ball joint. The last thing you want to do is damage that, and then you'll have to do the work all over again. So Just be careful of where you lift from and make sure that you have access to your bolt still. All right, that is going to be good for us there. Let's get our torque wrench and snug up this lower 18. Torque spec for this bolt is going to be 140 Newton meters plus 180 degrees. So once we do our initial 140, we're going to rotate the bolt another full half turn. Beautiful. That's our 180. Now let's do the upper 13 millimeter bolt on the strut fork. I'm gonna give it a quick snug and then we're gonna torque it down to 90 Newton meters. All right, let's get the screw jack out the rest of the way. And then we'll start getting our fender liners and everything back in place. We'll secure our ABS speed sensor harness back in place, and then we'll torque up that axle bolt as well. We're gonna feed in our back portion of our little fender liner cover here. I'm just gonna wrestle this on. Be mindful of the paint on your car. You don't wanna hit the fender. Got this back stud in as well. There we go. That's gonna really help hold everything up in place. Let's get those 210s in now so that it stays in place. To reuse these push pins, you just push the middle rivet portion of it out, like so. You get it back into your hole and then you push it flush to the collar of the rivet. So pretty straightforward. Don't forget your third push pin that goes in right here. I gotta find mine because I did drop it. Now we're gonna get the rest of our T25s in to secure this. All right, with that secured, let's not forget to secure our wheel speed sensor cable next. So let's do that now. Now we're gonna work on securing our axle once more, using a flathead within the vane of the rotor to help lock it up against the hub. These don't require a lot of torque, so we don't really need to lock it any further. If you want to, though, as insurance, lug bolt as well. This car is a 2018, so 17, 18, 20, and maybe 21, don't quote me to this. Basically everything but a 2019 is gonna call for 45 Newton meters plus an additional 90 degrees. If you have a 2019 model, it's gonna be 35 Newton meters plus an additional 90 degrees. So just for the 2019 year. Don't ask me why, it's a Volvo thing. But for us today, 2018 car, it's gonna be 45 Newton meters plus an additional 90. So I'm gonna mark it in relation to the inside. All right, let's recap. We have strut fork back in, both pinch bolts secured at ride height. End link is back in. Our cables secured back up to the fork with our 8mm bolt. Control arm hardware is all tightened down. Ball joints tightened down. Axle bolt is tightened down. If you've done the same thing on the other side, then it's time to throw the wheel back on. We're gonna get the wheel onto the hub. We're gonna snug it up evenly in a crisscross pattern with our impact just on a low setting, just to make sure that the wheel is flush against the hub. Then we will drop the car on the ground, torque everything to 140 Newton meters in the same crisscross pattern. And that will be concluding today's DIY, my good people. Overall, a really easy and straightforward job on the XC90, surprisingly. Big upgrade from the P3 and P2 chassis. Again, just with that one stud kind of being the tricky part. But again, we did it without any special tools today. Hopefully this helped you learn a thing or two at home. If so, please be sure to give this video a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments on what we did today, leave those in the comment section below. And if you like this DIY and you'd like to see more like them, consider subscribing. We are making new ones all the time. As always, thank you for watching. I'll catch you on the next one.